Hello and welcome back for another installment in our Courtroom Confidential Conversation series. For this episode, please join me in welcoming Mike King from Profiling Evil on YouTube. Hello, my friend. How are you? So good to see you.
Hey, it's great to be on with you, Joshua. Thanks for inviting me.
No, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this. We ask our channel subscribers and members who do you want to hear from next? We're always inviting suggestions because we're finding there is a very large community of true crime creators, and some have huge channels, some have smaller channels. Every single one of them's got an incredible backstory, and it's hard to keep up with all of these different folks, but your name and Profiling Evil came up quite a few times. So I said, let's talk to Mike. Let's see if he'd be interested, and you did. And so we're very grateful. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, well, that's wonderful that people would even suggest it. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Before we jump in, what many people may not know is we don't even know each other. We just met a few minutes ago. So everything you're going to be telling me, I'm learning for the first time too. And I know a little bit about your background from the bio I found online on your website. But let's start before, the kind of law enforcement career and YouTube career. Tell us a little bit where you grew up, where you come from.
Well, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and was the fourth child, the only boy in a family of four. A mother who had gone through, I don't know, 4 divorces by this time, or at least in her life, and she was a single mom raising us in a blue collar neighborhood, and we learned how to work, but we learned how to do a lot of things alone too, because she was gone a lot.
Wow. And did you spend most of your childhood, college years in Utah, or did higher education bring you outside of the state?
No. Actually, I when I was a senior in high school, my mother moved north to a community about 40 miles north of Salt Lake, and I finished my high school year there, and then went to school almost immediately at Weber State University. It was a college back then, and growing up, I either wanted to be a garbage man or a police officer, and I don't know why those two were so important to me as a kid, but I guess that was the track I took, and I guess both worked in the streets and picked up a lot of garbage. So maybe it was
Right.
just destiny.
Just dealing with different types of garbage, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
And so you early on, okay, putting aside the aspirations for work in the sanitation industry, you early on knew that law enforcement might be a part of your life. When did you actually decide, you know what, I'm going to pursue this? I don't know, did you go to the academy? How did that all begin?
Well, actually, I mean, thankfully I had good role models. I had a next door neighbor when I was living in Salt Lake City who was a Salt Lake County deputy, and he, when I was 16, 17 years old, took me out on a ride along. That really intrigued me. And then I attended South High School, which went out of business a few years after that. And I remember one day I was sitting in the gym. The football team had just finished practice. I was pressing weights, and a Salt Lake City police officer walked in and was standing over me as I was pumping a little iron, and he said, "Hey, I'm Niels," and he introduced himself. And I think I was having a little bit of a misspent youth at that time, and he took an interest in me, and because of that, I again had another great mentor and role model. I went into criminal justice in school, left for a period of time to serve a service mission for the faith that I believed in, and had the opportunity of learning a language and seeing a little bit of the world, and getting back, and then went to work at the police department in Ogden City, and spent about 10 years working in the police department. During that time, I ended up finding an opportunity to go to the county attorney's office or the district attorney's office, and started working there. And from there, kind of my career blossomed as I stumbled into the middle of a major ritual cult that was sexually abusing children. And after several years of investigation, we were able to serve search warrants on the compound, take a bunch of children into protective custody. We ended up ultimately rescuing 32 children
Wow.
and convicting 12 adults of somewhere around 787 sexual assaults and rapes of children.
Oh my
And
God.
we ultimately banked about 4,000 uh, counts of sexual assault and rape in the case. But after 2 years of going through the criminal justice system and putting those children through repetitive opportunities to testify, we made a conscious decision we were going to quit chasing people, and in the interest of trying to protect the children. And as a result of that, a number of people escaped going to jail and prison, in my opinion. But it was the right thing, we thought, at the time, in order to protect the children. Because if you remember back then, in those days, in the early 90s, children didn't have the same victim right advocacies that they have today. And so children were being forced to testify in hearings and preliminaries and trials over and over again. And it was like we had this kind of aha moment of, do we continue to victimize these children by making them relive these experiences instead of getting to the healing and moving on process? And so we chose to do that. So
Wow. A lot to digest there. I want to get
yeah,
back into this cult and the children, because that's fascinating. Sounds like a massive case. But if we could just take a quick step back to, you said that you went to school for criminal justice. What I've heard many people say that that's what they pursued. I'll be honest with you. I'm not even quite sure what it is education includes. What was it that you learned? Was there valuable tools that came out of that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, I think anyone who goes to a university learns how to think and how to adjust and how to deal with goofy professors and how to deal with requirements that you don't believe are necessary, but that is the way life is. And so going to college is an incredibly valuable component. In criminal justice, you're learning the criminal code. You're learning on based on cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, what to do or what not to do. You learn about forensics, which today these are individual tracks. In those days, we learned how to shoot a firearm into the tank and recover a bullet and examine the lands and grooves in a bullet and understand the forensics. We learned how to fingerprint and how to read a fingerprint and compare it with others. And all of that was just incredibly valuable throughout my career to understand the basics, not to be an expert in those things, but to understand what the experts would need. And it kind of changes your mentality as a police officer who is used to writing a report to really writing a narrative that describes what occurred, what the physical evidence is, what the behaviors at the crime scene were. And through that entire process, and of course through the investigation of the cult, that introduced me to profilers at the FBI. And I had the privilege of learning that kind of wacky art and science of profiling, and spent the rest of my career analyzing cases from a behavioral perspective. That pushed me on to my master's degree, which was in criminal behavior, and further developing, I guess, the expertise that I yammer about today, although I continue to question whether it really is expertise or not.
um, Again, so many things you've mentioned I want to get into, but I love the way that you explained how you benefited from college, was that it made you not an expert but kind of conversant in being able to do the work as a police officer. And I felt the same way about law school as we were talking about it. You come out of law school, yeah, you're technically a lawyer after you pass the bar, but you really don't know what you're doing. But more than anything in law school, you've learned a vocabulary. You've learned you're able
Yeah.
to speak a certain type of language so that when you do start to practice and they start mentioning things like, you know, contracts are offer acceptance and consideration. You're not hearing those terms for the first time, but you're like, okay, this is a vocabulary. These are muscles that I have stretched, but now I'm going to really start to develop them and understand that. So I appreciate the way you explain that. But
Well,
before,
Joshua, I mean, with what you had to endure going through not only 4 years of school but then law school, it's also this process of learning how to think critically. And a lot of people
yes,
want to just shortcut that and say, "No, I'll learn through life experience." Well, that's great. You will learn through life experience, but you need to have the opinions of others to be able to measure and balance the realities of life that you see. In my opinion, I just think schooling is so incredibly critical, and I just feel quite frankly sad for people who think they're a lot smarter than the need for school.
right, yeah, no, I completely agree. It's about so much more than just the classes you are taking. It's about the experience of having your thoughts tested, being able to defend your own beliefs. You're right. You're being given the tools on how to then be part of the functioning professional and adult world after that. And I do feel like shortcutting that can sometimes be a mistake.
I would
But
agree.
out of college, was it out of college that you then joined the department as an officer?
No, no, actually, about 2.5 years into my undergraduate work is when I got my job at the police department. And so I worked graveyard shifts, and I went to school in the daytime, and eventually, a little longer than normal, got my bachelor's degree. And then it was probably 7 or 8 years after that that I went after my master's.
So during that time, first of all, incredibly commendable to be working and going to college. But during that time, what are you? Are you start out in patrol? I imagine. Are you working your way up? I know that you have quite a resume in the department. What department was it, by the way?
So I worked for the Ogden City Police Department, which
Okay.
is in a county of about 280,000 people. So it's the department itself was about 150 police officers. So it gave you the opportunity to work in virtually every component of policing. Yes, I started out as a patrol officer, and actually came to the opinion after 28 years in the business that that was the best job in the department, because you were young, you were healthy, you were still full of excitement, and you got to go from one bizarre situation uh, to the next. But along the way, I was able to ride motors for the police department, and
What
even
is tell
that.
us about that? What is that?
Oh, of course, in those days, Chips was popular on television. So that the idea of being able to put boots that went up to your knees, and helmet on, and wear mirrored sunglasses and drive around on a powerful motorcycle was just a blast. And it was a great experience. I rode motors for a couple of years. I did spend one evening assigned to Vice, and that clearly was not my area of expertise. I was assigned to go down and purchase a sex worker as part of my assignment. And when she explained to me the things she was going to do for a certain amount of money, I just stood there dumbfounded and said, "You got to be kidding me!" And the vice sergeant pulled up, honked on his horn, and said, "You know what? I don't think you're cut out for this." But he said there is a really cool assignment in SWAT that's coming up. And so I became a SWAT officer after that, and then evolved into detectives, and then spent the remainder of my career investigating serial predators.
Tell us about SWAT. I feel like a lot of people hear that term, but we don't know exactly what it is. What does that assignment involve?
Well, SWAT would be akin to thinking of special forces in the military. It's a special team of officers who train together. We worked every single day, every single shift together. Our team was called the tactical team. We wore plain clothes. We drove around in plain cars. We got our vehicles from local car dealers or uh, drug dealers who we happened to seize their property from, and our job was to handle nothing but major felonies in progress. And so we went from hostage situations to aggravated robberies in progress, and you are trained to work as a team. My particular job was explosives ordnance in the beginning, and you are trained in those capabilities. I was sent out to Hill Air Force Base and trained in EOD and how to do some things. And the beauty of that is that you work so intimately with other officers that you know how they will respond and when they will respond in any given situation.
Wow. But as you're doing this, when did the idea that you wanted to go back to school and get your master's, or was that always the plan? Tell us about why you wanted to pursue that.
That actually came about at the encouragement of my mentor in the profiling process, and he recommended that I continue learning more about behavior and psychology, and that was actually the impetus behind that. As I went through that training and realized that there was more that I could learn along those lines.
What is Tell us how that began then. What First of all, what is profiling? We all hear that. I feel like we all feel like we know what we're talking about, but what is it exactly, and how were you first exposed to that?
So during the Zion Society investigation, which was this cult that I mentioned early on, some of the behaviors in the cult and the dynamics in the cult were, you got to keep in mind, I'd never handled outside of a patrol officer responding to a domestic violence case or a sexual assault and then passing it on to the detective division. I'd never really handled any kind of case like that. I mean, I was a knuckle dragger that was good at a bar fight or stopping a traffic accident from getting worse. But really getting into the depths of human behavior was outside my bounds. And as I inherited that case, and I literally did inherit it, it was not a case I asked for. Um, I realized that I was way outside of my comfort zone when it came to the cult behaviors that were going on, the victim selection process that was occurring, the methodology that they were using to maintain control over the members. And so I reached out to a retired FBI profiler who was serving as a police chief in the state of Utah. And he then started to work with me on this case and helping me understand from his perspective as a profiler what some of those behaviors likely meant. And really, I mean, on television, profilers are kind of these people that are voodoo soothsayers that can look at somebody and tell you everything about them. And the reality is the profiling process is taking all of the traditional forms of evidence. And as a lawyer, think about, when we talk about those traditional forms of evidence, we talk about physical evidence or forensic evidence. We talk about eyewitness accounts or circumstantial evidence, or we talk about confessions or admissions. But what a profiler does is they take all of that really valuable content that's been collected at a crime scene or through an investigation, and they allow it to kind of sit on a shelf for a short period of time. And they go back and revisit the crime scene with a set of glasses that are only interested in what behaviors are exhibited. How did the predator enter the residence that they entered? Was it something that indicated that they had access, like a key, or did they, in the old days, cut a telephone cord and then jimmy the lock open, or did they go through a sliding window? Was there amount of force or violence that would indicate that they were a little disorganized, or something that would indicate they were more organized? And then how did they approach the victim in the home? Did they just do this blitz style attack, or was it completely different? And so what criminal profilers do is they examine the behaviors that are going on, and then they come back to law enforcement and say, based on the behaviors I'm seeing, the maybe the blood spatter on a wall, or the method in which the victim was left at the crime scene afterward, whether they were maybe covered or displayed. All of these things are pointing to a certain personality in the offender. And then what police are able to do is work in tandem with that, and then start to glue together the physical forensic eyewitness accounts, and then look at this huge pool of possible suspects and see who rises to the top, because they start fitting behaviorally what that kind of person would be like. And so you think about some of these, wacky criminal cases that are out there. What a profiler does, or what I do when I look at a case like this, is I look at what's really going on overall. What motivates this offender? Why did they select that particular victim? What was it about it that got the predator's motor running? What was it that made it possible for them to gain control of that victim? And what was the method and the order in which certain things happened in the violation of law, whatever the violation was? But what was it that tells us about that person's personality? Were they reliving a fantasy they had, or were they a psychopath who just decided, I'm going to hurt somebody? So in a really long, drawn out way, and I'll take a breath and allow you to maybe fix all this, is to say that it's taking all of this information and saying, don't make any quick decisions, but here, let's talk about what kind of personalities are involved. And then from there, it leads into all kinds of great opportunities to say, if in fact this person was motivated by a fantasy that's driving this, here's maybe some questions you could ask that would elicit responses that might lead to a confession or something else.
Thank you for that, and I could listen to you talk about that kind of stuff for hours, because I find that profiling and the science and the psychology behind it just absolutely fascinating stuff. I've read a couple of books on it, and it is amazing to me some of these profilers who are incredibly experienced and skilled, how specific they can even get about the person that they're looking for, down to the idea that, this person may have a speech impediment. This person may have some sort of um, uh, disfigurement, because the way that they committed the crime, you could tell they didn't want to be looked at, and all of this kind of stuff that it's Sherlock Holmes type stuff, and it's really incredible. And they're right a lot of the time, and they do take this vast, um, you know, group of possible suspects and narrow it down enough that the police can then do the groundwork to try to figure out who that is. And when it all comes together and works, it really is remarkable stuff.
Yeah, and I'll just add that TV profilers are really good at it, and they are really fast at getting to the end of the row and determining who the suspect is. But the tragedy of profiling is it really is only good after you have multiple
Right.
events, and so you're
Right.
looking at repeat predatory behavior, which means that the victim toll continues to mount. And I often use it when people say, "Oh, how cool it is that you can come up with this, and you must, this wisdom behind it." And I say, but let's just assume that you were standing on the street corner looking at your phone, and a white car drove by, and somebody said, "What did that car look like?" And you go, "Oh, it was kind of a white car." and then if I drove that car past you 15 times or 15 victims later, you'd be
Yeah.
pretty dang critical about describing what that car is like and what it sounds like and it grunts like and everything else. And that's really the sad part, but the powerful part of profiling. And the thing that I sometimes argue with psychologists who say, you know what, that's just voodoo, is say, no, it isn't. It is analysis to the next level that oftentimes isn't happening in cases.
Yeah, but you're right. Usually, when you hear about them getting involved, it's when you have several dead bodies that you're already looking at, and so now you're at a
Yeah.
point where they need that extra help. You've mentioned this case a couple of times, so I do want to hear about it. The Zion Society case. I'm curious. One, how did this case kind of break? How were you first able to uncover it? And then how did you get involved and see that case through?
I was living an investigator's dream at the time that this case fell into my lap. I was in the middle of working with a group of officers. We were doing undercover sting operations, buying stolen vehicles, and we were working our way up the ladder, building these stings together. It was true police work where we got to take the knuckle draggers and kick down doors and arrest people and do all kinds of really cool police stuff that you want to do when you're a 30-year-old testosterone filled policeman. But but I walked into the county attorney's office one day. I was working for the county attorney, leading this task force, and the receptionist said, "Hey, do you have a minute to talk to this woman sitting in the lobby?" And of course, I went over, and she, just a beautiful young girl, probably 21 years old, stood up. She had this jet black hair, Joshua, and she was just so confident. And she looked at me in the eyes and she said, I've been involved in a cult that's sexually abusing children. Do you have a minute to talk to me?"
Oh, wow.
And and that was my introduction into cult investigations, which literally changed the direction of my profession, and took me down pathways that I haven't expected. As soon as she said that, I mean, it was like I thought to myself, "Oh, I got to act like I hear this every day." So I took her back to my office, and for the next 2 hours, she unloaded how this cult had been grooming children, sexually abusing them, and how she herself had been pulled into it. At the conclusion, I asked her to come back the following day for an interview, and I went to the county attorney or the district attorney for people that live in different kinds of venues, and I tried to hand the case off so I could go back and do what I was competent at. And the district attorney said, "This one's yours. Drop what you're doing. If children are truly at risk, you need to move on this, but you can't tell
Wow.
anybody," because some of the allegations that came out were that law enforcement was involved. Well, what I've learned over
Oh
my
my God.
career of looking at cults is there's always law enforcement involved, because that's what they tell their membership, to get their members think, if I go to the cops, my cult
Right.
leader is going to find out about it. But I was new at this, and of course, we went to work, and for the next 30 days, I worked probably 18 hours a day. I was able to assemble a small team of investigators to help me. And at the conclusion of that 30 days, we had enough information that I was able to get search warrants. It was a compound of about 14 homes. And I was able to get search warrants for no-knock search warrants, because there were allegations of weapons storage, doomsday belief systems, all kinds of things that were obviously nerve-wracking for law enforcement. And on the morning of the raid, we took 70 police officers and kicked in the place
Wow.
and took the children into custody. We had the Division of Family Services on hand to take the children. And one of the exciting things, and something that I would hope you would certainly promote, is that we had just completed building the second children's advocacy center in the United States in our community, because the district attorney was so frustrated with cops interviewing child victims in smoky-filled police departments where a robbery suspect was sitting next to them as they were being interviewed in a room, that we completed this little children's advocacy center. We called it the Children's Justice Center. And the first children to go through those doors ended up being the children rescued in the Zion Society raid. And so, what a baptism by fire for those social workers and police officers to have a case of this magnitude be the first. And the reason why I say that is because when we decided to write the book Deceived, and that actually was a surprise, I had been doing some work for the Dr. Phil show, and I went out to I thought I was talking about a murder case. And when I walked on the stage, there were 6 or 7 of the girls who I had rescued as children who were
Oh my
now in their
God.
40s
Oh,
on the
wow.
stage. It was the first time I'd seen them in 30 years. And we talked about the case. It was the first time I'd seen him. I just fell apart like a baby.
I can
And
imagine.
but at the end of that, Dr. Phil said, "And folks, Mike's writing a book on this." And when the show ended, I said, I'm not writing a book." And he said, "Well, you better. I just told 10 million people you were." And he
I
actually
love that.
advertised it a couple of times on his show after that. And so we wrote this book, but my wife and I felt so sheepish in taking any revenues that we've pushed all the revenue back toward the Children's Justice Center or to Weber State University, where I went to school, the criminal justice program to train police officers. And the exciting news is that in April or May of this year, the brand new Children's Justice Center will open, and we're going to have many of those children victims who are now survivors and in their 45, 50-year age range back for that ribbon cutting of the new Justice Center.
That
So
is incredible.
please, everybody, buy the book and
No,
know that you're not padding my pockets. But if you buy any of my other books, you definitely are padding my pocket. So
I'm looking at it right now. It is called Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society, called by Michael King. It's on Amazon. We will have the link in the description for this interview, but I'm going to go ahead and purchase one right now because I'm interested in it, and more than anything, I love where the proceeds for that are going. So that's incredibly commendable. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. How many children total were rescued out of that?
So 32 on the first day,
Wow.
32 children were eventually taken out of the cult. And on the first day, we were able to take 9 and put them in protective custody on that very first day. But ultimately, it resulted in 32 children being
Wow.
taken out.
You had mentioned earlier how this became so sprawling and ever kind of growing, which a lot of times these investigations that involve trafficking and involve children and involve cults, they do become incredibly sprawling. That
Yeah.
you eventually realized that you had to arrive at the decision of where you needed to just stop, and stopping may not have been at the end of the investigation, but that you wanted to consider what you were putting these children through. And I was hoping you could share a little bit more about that, because it is, I think, so important for people to understand that when they hear about cases where somebody got away with something, doing something awful, and it involved, women or children, that many times one of the difficulties, the primary difficulties in these types of cases, is getting that person the bravery and strength to deal with this entire process, because it is not easy and it's not sheltered, and they're going to be out there and they're going to be testifying in open court and having someone cross-examine them, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to go through. And so it's not many times that law enforcement drop the ball or that the DA's office is too scared to file charges, but sometimes it's just, we cannot put these people through it, or they just don't have it in them after everything that they've been through.
That is exactly right, Joshua. And I think um, I'll just tell you that that was a major concern, is that we were continuing to victimize the children by having them testify. And back in those days, defense attorneys, they would do things in the preliminary hearing that they certainly wouldn't dare try in front of a jury because it would
Right.
alienate them. And so they would literally beat up on these little children. Some children as young as 6 years old on the stand with a defense attorney hammering them over and over and over again. It was emotionally traumatizing for the child. It was traumatizing for the prosecutor, for all of us. And so a conscious decision was made that enough was enough, and that 12 of the kingpins going to prison was enough. We, at the time, had the early days of victims' rights being talked about, and there was money established in the state to get counseling for those children, and the parents were ordered to get that counseling. The problem is the courts, because they didn't know what else to do, sent the children back to the very parents that were allowing them to be in a cult
Oh my God.
environment and be sexually assaulted. And many of them said, well, we didn't know it was that bad or what was going on. And the courts believed that the parents were in the best position to fix these kids. And so I purposely walked away from all of it. uh, I mean, these things are incredibly difficult on everybody that touches them. It is something that you never quit thinking about or forget when you're involved in a case of this magnitude. And so I had full intentions of never thinking about this case again. Back in those days, we used to keep our own case files, though, if you remember. And so in the garage in my on my top shelf, I still had a box that said Zion Society that had old interview tapes and photographs and crime scene imagery and other kind and my police reports. And the years ticked by, and I remember in early 19 I'm sorry, in early 2020, as COVID was hitting, I had made some conscious decisions, and I called up my mentor, this FBI profiler who trained me as a profiler, and I said, "Hey, I got to meet you, and if you want, I'm going to give you my files because I don't ever want to look at this thing again." And he literally thought I had cancer and was dying because no cop gives up his secret stash of case reports. And
Right.
I remember delivering those to him, and it felt so nice to be free of all of that. That evening, I got home, and as strange as this might sound, I received an email from a girl named Amber, who happened to be one of the child victims in that case. Had not talked to her in 30 years. And she
Wow.
said, Mr. King, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I'm Amber and I was in the cult and I'm having a lot of memories. And I wondered if you could maybe talk to me and help me sort through those. And I thought about it for 2 days and I sent her back an email and I said, Amber, I wish you the very best. You need professional help, not me. And I'm not in a position to help. And best wishes with your life. And she, I'm sure was just devastated and wrote a simple thank you. Well, and this is the honest truth. 3 days later, I received a second email from a girl named Andrea, who was also a victim of the cult.
Wow.
And she said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Andrea, and I was a victim in the cult, and I'm having a lot of problems and memories, and I wondered if you'd talk to me." And again, I responded the exact same way, but I kept thinking, how on earth is this happening like
Right.
this? And the very next day, the district attorney who had become the chief deputy attorney general that I worked for when I was in the attorney general's office, he called me and he said, "Hey, the Victims' Rights Council wants to know if we are interested in doing a 30-year, what's the state of cults in Utah?" Because we have polygamy and other kinds of closed societies that are all fitting within that same kind of behavior. And I told him, "No, I'm not interested." And then my thoughts got to me, and over the course of a couple of weeks, I thought, after talking with my wife, who am I to determine whether these kids deserve someone to bounce ideas off of or whatever? And so I called back Amber and Andrea, or emailed them back and said, if you'd like to get a group of the kids together, we can have a Zoom call because we were now in COVID, and we can talk a little bit about this. And we put together a Zoom call. And this is what Dr. Phil found out about because I had mentioned it when we were working on a homicide case of a mother out in Kansas together. And we got on this phone call with these victims from this case. They had not seen each other in 30 years, Josh, and it was remarkable as they talked to each other. I mean, there was laughter, there was tears, there was cussing like sailors at times. I mean, it was incredible. And there were aha moments as they reflected and learned. In fact, I'll never forget one girl who finally said to one of the other women, I don't remember you ever being there. And it was like this drop mic moment, and everybody was just like paralyzed, you know? And
Mhm.
she said, well, you may not have remembered because you were very young, but she says, I'll never forget every morning curling your hair with a curling iron. And she said, the day I burned you on the neck right here, and the girl burst out into tears because she had this
Wow.
memory come back of being burned by one of the girls in the cult.
Wow.
And so to see these things coming together and forged together. But the important thing that I learned through all of this, Joshua, was that they didn't get the counseling that the state promised them because their parents said, don't make a big deal out of nothing. They went on and worked hourly wage jobs the rest of their lives because they were homeschooled and they didn't receive an education. And they worked jobs like strippers, or they had all kinds of incredible relationships that went one way or another way. They also all indicated that they all felt like they had to have a purpose in what happened to them and to be able to contribute so that somebody else doesn't suffer like they have suffered.
Incredible.
Those that had children spoke about how they don't allow their children to do sleepovers. They'd not talked to each other in 30 years, but the things that terrified them as children, they have carried on for 30 years. And as a result of that, I got a hold of the district attorney and I said, we got to do something about that. We made a call to the governor's office, and at the end of the day, after a few calls, we brought him back onto a call, and we had the governor's office approved for up to $50,000 in counseling for each one of them
I
at
love it.
today's date. The University of Weber State, or the president of Weber State University, Dr. Brad Mortensen, came on and he promised them that if they wanted a GED or a PhD, that the university would help them accomplish that. And it was an incredible experience watching as they realized that even 30 years later, there was still hope for piecing together. And then the last thing that was that they indicated, they said, we want you to write a book. And that's the purpose of the book and why it's there. So
That's incredible. That's it. You gave me chills telling that story. I just can't imagine the just strength and courage and the ability of people who've gone through that to try to find some good out of it and do some good, and you being able to play a part in all of that. That's really breathtaking stuff. I wish we had more time to just talk about that case alone, but like you said, there's the book. We will make sure people know about the book, and maybe I will bug you again just to come on to talk about that case. But okay, so if you go through this incredible point in your career, um, eventually though, you do end up retiring and have a career outside of that law enforcement career. Could you
yeah.
tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm eventually trying to work up to how in the world a man like yourself finds yourself on this crazy thing called YouTube. But before we go from law enforcement, there was a step in between.
Yes, there was. Well, after the Zion Society, I kind of had carved a niche for myself. And if you remember back in the early 90s, that was kind of the satanic panic era across the
Right.
country. And the legislature in Utah put a bucket load of money into looking at ritual crime across the state. And so I was fortunate to work with a team of people and publish a report called Ritual Crime in Utah, where we looked at the issues around ritual crime. And specifically, the thing I want to point out is that I have continued to talk about the fact that law enforcement prosecutors need to quit yapping about the cult and the weirdness in the cult and focus on the elements of a crime, prove that a child sexual assault happened, and then at the
Yeah.
sentencing, show all these wacky things about coercive control. But and so that really became the defining mark of the remainder of my career, was that I spent it looking at serial predators of all types as a result of the training that I received and those background experiences. And when I retired, uh, I was offered a job by a company in Redlands, California, so just east of you, called ESRI, Environmental Systems Research Institute, which is the largest GIS or mapping company in the world. And for 17 years, I spent time working with the largest police departments in the world on intelligence and crime solving and other kinds of things. And tried to retire from that a couple of years ago, but was picked up by an intelligence company in Virginia. And I spent a year trying to help open the European market for intel and mining data from the deep, the dark, and the surface web. And at the conclusion of that, I said, it's now time to buy a chainsaw and a new fly rod. And some old friends that I had worked with through many industries that have a company in Virginia called and asked me to do some consulting for them. So I work about 10 hours a week now, just consulting on public safety issues around the globe. And it's just been a great career, a great experience. And I keep thinking I ought to quit, but I keep making money doing a little bit here and there. So I guess I'll do it.
hard, hard to say no when people keep pounding on your door and say, "We'll hand you a check."
Yeah. I've been very fortunate. So post that, I was given opportunities by Dr. Phil, and I've done a number of shows with him, with News Nation, Court TV, Fox Nation. I just completed a couple of videos with Fox Nation. One of my favorites on the assassination of King Tut, and it's a book that Greg, my mentor, and I wrote about using profiling to solve King Tut's murder. And then I just signed for season number 3 with the History Channel, History's Greatest Mysteries with Lawrence Fishburne. And
Oh, very
last
cool.
night, if you go on the web and look up History's Greatest Mysteries, episode 3 of season 6, we talked about Al Capone last night and the Valentine's Day murder. So that came out last night. So that's kind of
Fantastic.
what I do
You're
with my
all over
free
the
time.
place. And when you have any free time between all of that, you've also got your YouTube channel. So tell us how, because listen, I understand you've got this incredible experience and why people would want to have you on to interview Dr. Phil and documentaries and everything else. But what inspired you to say, you know what? In addition to all of that, I'm going to go ahead and try this thing called YouTube and start putting out my own videos, because you produce your own content, you're doing your own lives. I mean, this is a full-time job in and of itself, I happen to know. Tell us how that all started.
During COVID, June of 2020, my kids one day, I guess they're all adults, they all have their own families, but they've listened to my goofy war stories over the years. And they said, instead of telling us one more time, what you ought to do is just record it and let us put it on YouTube for you. And so I recorded talking about some particular criminal case. And for some reason, it resonated with people. And so my kids said, well, we'd like to do this with you, Dad. And the chance to work with your kids was kind of exciting. So they did all the work and all the heavy lifting, and I would show up and just yammer for a bit. And what I didn't realize is that there would be a little bit of a demand being created And then my kids got on with their lives and they all just walked away from me and left me standing in the corner. So I thought, well, I'll put out a little video here or there, or I'll repurpose something that I did on court TV tonight on a case and talk a little bit about it. And that kind of led to what we do. And I'm so troubled by the amount of uh, YouTube creators and audio podcast creators that just delve into conspiracy theories and yammer about stuff that really I think is damaging, Joshua, to people. And I think that it's damaging, frankly, to the YouTube theater of people that are trying to get across, just let's talk about what's really happening. That I decided, you know what, I'm going to just focus on helping people understand a little bit about criminal behavior. I want to talk about what's factually being released by relevant, worthy news agencies or the government agency itself. And I'm not going to explore conspiracy theories.
Mhm.
And as a result, there's a small group of people that seem to like it. My videos don't do near as well as most of those who are in this same genre with me. And that's because I guess I just am not really that dynamic. I don't care to be sensational, but I do care about being factual, and factual isn't as cool as conspiracy.
Well, it's not going to get the clicks, but it's certainly not going to give anybody anything worthwhile listening to. I do value that a lot about your channel. Watching many of your videos, that does show through that you are focused on facts and giving people accurate information as best that you possibly can. So I appreciate you, in spite of what that may do to your click rate. I appreciate you sticking to it. Tell us
Well,
though, how
thank
do
you.
you pick your videos? Because you're not exactly taking, what happens to just be in the news today. You are reaching back to some older cases and to some less well-known cases. How do you Who does the research? How do you pick these topics? Where does that come from?
Being retired now has made it a little easier because what I do on a contractual basis, I can do from about anywhere in the world. But you're right. I think there are enough people yammering about something that's hot in the media and talking about it from a bunch of different directions. But that's what people want to hear, and I get it. It's just I'm not interested in doing it. It just like is so taxing on me because I feel like I'm constantly thinking, well, what are the metrics showing instead of what would really teach a principle? And so I've
Love
tried to
that.
look at cases that actually will teach a principle that helps people reduce their own level of risk, that helps them maybe evaluate crime or criminals critically, or that even helps them evaluate their own choices critically. And that's really hard because people say, well, at times you might be pretty close to the edge of victim blaming. It's never about victim blaming, but it's absolutely about being responsible for choices that say, hey, you decided to drink all night and then stumble into a parking lot and wait for an Uber. Those are choices that are consciously made that could contribute to victimization. I often use the example of my wife when one day we were walking out of the mall and it was dark, and she said, "What are you thinking about?" And I thought, I don't know. I'm thinking about, should we grab a burger or should we get a puppy, or I don't know. And she says, "You know what I'm thinking about? I'm walking out here thinking, how far is my car away? Is it dark where my
Wow.
car is parked? Are there people standing around my car that would be a risk to me?" And those are the things that I really try to get across when I do my stuff. So I'm looking at cases that I hope help teach a principle about human behavior.
Well, fantastic job. I feel like you're doing it. I feel like mission accomplished. Tell us, is there stuff coming up in the future, cases you're looking forward to, different topics you're interested in covering, maybe a new series or book that you're working on? Give us something that we can look forward to.
Well, so I will be speaking at CrimeCon again this year, and I'm
Fantastic.
looking forward to that. I also have the book Deceived has been purchased by the podcast company that created the Cold series, which has I don't know 500 million downloads or something. It is like the one of the most popular true crime stories that have ever been put out.
Hmm.
And they are going to release that in about April or May. We've been recording for the last year, and that is going to have the actual victims and survivors of this case. It'll have the police officers that were involved in the case. That's really exciting. And we're trying to time that to release at the same time that the Children's Justice Center ribbon cutting is,
Ah,
in hopes that it will drive more contributions toward the Justice Center. So I'm excited about that. And while I'm not ready to say the title, I have a new book that's coming out in June that is in final edits. And it is a book that will be exploring predatory decision making and ways to reduce our own levels of risk.
Mike, you are the hardest working retired guy I think I have ever met. I love to hear all of the stuff that you've got going on, but it also shines through the passion that you have for a lot of this, and I can tell that you're not just doing this to have something to do, but that you really are putting your heart and soul into a lot of this stuff. This is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of this stuff with us. When I asked you the question, what do you got planned for the future? I was not expecting as much that you have planned. So that's fantastic.
Thank you,
Um,
Joshua. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
it was a pleasure for me. There's so much more. I want to read this book. I want to listen to the podcasts, more of your channel that I want to dig into. Before I let you go, the YouTube channel is called Profiling Evil. Is there social media or websites or anywhere else that people can go to find out more about you and the work that you've done?
I think if you just put in the app Profiling Evil, and that'll take you to about everything. There is another podcast that I did in Southeast Asia that actually went to number 3 on Apple's
Wow.
podcast list. It's called Mapping Evil with Mike King, and it coincides with it's a 2-year podcast. And at the conclusion of it, we believe we solve the oldest cold case in Queensland as a result of
I
that.
love it. I
So
love
it's
it.
kind of a fun one. And what we do is compare. It's with a very popular Australian newscaster, and she and I kind of banter back and forth, and we explore criminal serial killer cases in Australia and serial killers in the United States. And then we talk about behaviorally how the distance and even kangaroos don't make a difference in behavior.
You heard it. No, criminals are not safe with Mike around wherever you live in the world. So thank you, sir, again for taking the time. This has been fantastic. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Josh.
We hope you enjoyed this interview. If there is someone you would like to hear from, a well-known creator or perhaps someone you feel that gets overlooked, please let us know in the comments. And please check out our playlist of past conversations. We appreciate you all. Please remember to like this episode and subscribe for more content like this. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of Courtroom Confidential Conversations.